Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
So on our Listener's Choice feature this morning, we are talking about human trafficking. One of our listeners has asked that we discuss how prevalent the trafficking of South Africans is abroad. And earlier this year, we had 23 South Africans returning home after they thought they were taking up promising jobs overseas, only to discover that they had been lured into a human trafficking syndicate. And often many people get offered work in call centers, at restaurants in Thailand, but instead they find themselves trafficked across borders. Like, for instance, in the case of Thailand, you can be trafficked into Myanmar, stripped of your passport and forced into online scams under slave-like conditions. And there are many people that have endured years of exploitation before a coordinated rescue mission can finally, bring them back home. So we need to be very, 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 very cautious, right? Often you've got a few people being rescued, but there are many other people that are still living under brutal conditions and facing intimidation and torture and forced labor. In fact, South Africans, you would probably argue, are being targeted for these fake jobs abroad, even more. And when they arrive, they soon find out that these jobs are nothing but human trafficking syndicates. I mean, there are high levels of unemployment in this country, and that's part of the reason why such jobs become more attractive, especially to young South Africans. Have you ever been a victim of an international job scam? And how do you identify an international job scam? Do you know what to be cautious of? Are there sort of jobs you wanted to take and you already soon picked up that something is wrong here? I want you to share your experiences with us on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Emma Van Der Walt is the founder of Brave to Love, which is an anti-human trafficking organization. And Emma will be guiding us through this conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Emma. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Clement. It's wonderful tuning in this morning.
How big is this problem of South Africans being trafficked abroad through these fake job adverts? And I don't know if you've seen recently, we've seen influencers also talking about possible opportunities and Russia, and you've got our government coming out and saying, hey, be very careful, because some of these end up being, just an opportunity to lure young people, and then they get exploited. How big is this crisis?
Yeah, so Clement, I think we first need to look back in the history of South Africa. We know a few years back we had South Africans that were lured for teaching jobs in China, and South Africa had to do repatriation because of the false jobs on that side and the trafficking that happened. And then it was a little bit quiet for a while, but currently there's a very, very, very strong trend of recruiting Africans and also South Africans. And we need to ask why South Africans. And there's a few reasons when looking at the different recruiters that are, which are traffickers that are recruiting South Africans. So firstly, obviously mentioning the Myanmar case, Thailand, specific ages, looking at young adults. Unemployment is very high in South Africa, and they're looking for people that can speak English and are computer literate. That's their target market. And then it's very easy because South Africans are vulnerable because we need income. We are struggling with poverty, and they're looking for abroad for possible opportunities. And then, unfortunately, the reality of getting there to Thailand and a rude awakening of realizing I am trafficked now into a scamming compound run by Chinese mafia groups. Same with the Russia, with Russia, the recruitment currently happening, where the Global Initiative actually did a full report on this, where it's more looking at labor trafficking, but we know Russia is extremely high, and China on the BRICS countries on trafficking, countries that are red flag countries for human trafficking.
So, and of course, many of us always assume that trafficking mainly involves, like, let's say, sex work, for instance. But these scams seem to be more focused on forced labor. So what are the different forms of trafficking that are taking place?
Yeah, very interesting question, because we've seen a very strong change in these trends, because we firstly need to define what is human trafficking. We're looking at human slavery, and then we're looking at three phases. We're looking at the recruitment phase, transportation, and then the exploitation that takes place. So we work closely with the UNODC and the United Nations, and 4 years ago we were at the Asia Trafficking Conference in specifically focusing on Asia, because we know Asia is extremely high, and we met some experts on the field, and this was 4 years ago, where they started saying they saw these scamming compounds. Obviously, the Chinese after COVID started putting up all these scamming compounds, and they didn't realize there were victims with inside. We thought it's criminals. Everyone's just scamming people out of their money. It's a criminal operation. But some of these victims started jumping out of these compounds, breaking their bones, and running for help. And that's how they realized that these people are actually behind a computer, forced into slavery. And this is where we talk about trafficking into criminality, where a victim is forced to do criminal activity against their will, threatened, violence involved. So we do see sex trafficking still very high on the radar. We know women and children are targeted, but labor trafficking, I think after COVID, is definitely picking up very strong, and a lot of men are becoming victims as well. And then obviously the labor trafficking and criminal into criminality, and there are more forms of trafficking.
So I do want you maybe to share more with us about the rescued South Africans in Myanmar. What did they go through? I mean, how severe were the conditions that they endured?
Yeah, I think people don't always understand the reality, and I even get emotional even talking about it, because it's a human life, and it's real. It's people. It's our citizens that were there, and a lot of them had vulnerabilities of unemployment, and were recruited online through saw a Facebook ad saying, or a friend. They are even, and this is what we need to understand, there are South Africans that are criminal, that need to be criminally charged, because they are recruiting other South Africans into these scamming compounds. So a lot of them, firstly, you click on the ad, fill in your detail, and then immediately someone from the HR department will contact you, do a formal interview, telling you what the job is like, asking you questions, like a decent, organized interview. And then they say your passport needs to be ready. Once your passport is ready, we will pay for the flight ticket, your accommodation, everything is paid for to get you on the flight, but you need to start as soon as possible. So, and then sometimes in 3 days, these victims are on the plane, paid for. They land in Bangkok, at Bangkok airport. We do see that there are people from Thailand that are involved in this operation. Greeted by a lady with their names on. They are traveled with a very luxury vehicle to a hotel, 8 hours drive. Once they get to the hotel, they get time to rest, order whatever they want. And that the moment after that, the trafficking starts, because then they are picked up by military type vehicles, guns, and then they are taken photos of as proof of life, and then they are smuggled over the border of Myanmar. And some of them even freak out at that point, saying, "Where am I going? I don't know where I'm going." They lose cell phone contact, and then they are introduced into the scamming compounds. You can't get out of these compounds. There are cameras everywhere. They are monitored. It's a military compound where the Chinese are actually renting from Myanmar military. And then the conditions, obviously, they are taught to scam, the living conditions of sleeping arrangement, everything. But then it's debt control, so you can never get out, because you need to pay these scammers a large amount of 50,000 rand or even more to free yourself out of it. And these people don't have that money to get themselves out of the situation. And then they are bound to a 2-year contract or whatever, strict rules, not always access to medicine and needs. But most of all, it's the punishment. If they don't make their targets, they get sent to the military. They got threatened. Some of the men were beaten severely. They might be a little bit softer on the women, but there's physical violence involved. There's state control. There's a psychological, and this is what we need to understand with trafficking. It's not always, although this is physical entrapment, but it's also psychological entrapment, where the victim feels that they cannot exit because they are threatened with imprisonment and beaten. So there's different strategies for control of the trafficker.
Yeah. So what do we need to be careful of, Emma? I'm just getting goosebumps just you explaining those conditions. Because there are many South Africans that are unemployed. They're desperate for opportunities. So what are the red flags that people should look out for when they see these online job ads?
Correct. I think we firstly need to flag opportunities to Thailand because they're targeting South Africans because we only need a travel visa to go for 3 months to Thailand. And so you need a work permit to go work in Thailand. And this is what the Thailand government is also saying. So that's firstly that we need to flag Thailand at this point. So because there are a lot of South Africans still being recruited that are going over. And once again, I will not, even as an individual, I will not take a job on social media. It's just a risky platform to go abroad and just leave everything behind because you are vulnerable and traffickers will try to isolate their victims. It's not always a kidnapping. They use coercion and grooming and manipulation to get the person. And it seems so legit. We've seen even modeling agencies recruiting girls, and this is where the influencers are coming in, using these platforms to build trust because you trust this influencer. Build the trust. Even with the modeling, it's always someone that you might trust to get you into an isolated position where you cannot ask for help. And even these South Africans in the compound, they do not have phone access. They need to hide their phones. Their phones are being monitored 24 hours. They can't reach out for help. It's really a slavery condition. So the human traffic hotline, and this is very important, they actually have a service where they can verify job opportunities that are abroad. They are an international organization, so the South African Human Traffic Hotline. They connect with 821, an international anti-trafficking organization where you can verify to make sure that you are safe before going across border. I know I've recently dealt with a case of a modeling opportunity of a girl wanting to go to Dubai or Saudi Arabia. These are red flags where we need to make sure, what are we looking for and what's going to happen when you get there.
Sure. Yeah, it's 21 minutes after 11 o'clock. Let's take a quick ad break. When we come back, if you've got any questions for Emma Van Der Walt, my guest this morning, you can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0727021702 or call us on 011-883-0702.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers
Listener's choice.
with Clement Manyathela.
24 minutes after 11 o'clock, we're talking about the prevalence of the trafficking of South Africans abroad with Emma Van Der Walt. I've got your voice notes coming through, so let's start there.
Hi, Clement. On the topic of human trafficking, I want to know, does it apply to all countries in this world or just certain countries? Because if you look at countries like Australia and you're interested in going to that country, is there a possibility of being human trafficked? I assumed, I don't know if I'm being naive, that there's no possibility because it's the first world country. And also, how do you avoid this problem then? Because how do you look for a legit agency from South Africa if you want to immigrate to countries like Australia? How do you get legit agencies? Because a lot of people can just apply for jobs online and it won't really be legit, and that's when you have problems like human trafficking, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, Emma, is this mostly a crisis in first world countries?
So we're looking at a global scale. There are high-risk countries. Like I said, Southeast Asia are high-risk countries, but it's a global problem, and there's not one country that I can say that is not without victims. Even Australia, I've actually worked with Australians that specifically within the sex trade, commercial sex trade, that were trafficked, and also within South Africa, within Australia. So it's not necessarily, I think that the key is to make sure that we become knowledgeable on how to identify signs of trafficking and how to stand and fight together, because it's a global problem. It's not only South Africa, but we're looking at certain countries that are extremely vulnerable. And for instance, when we look at these trafficking compounds, one of the questions that I ask some of the NGOs on that side is, these recruiters, from which African countries are they recruiting most? And Ethiopia came up, Ethiopia and Burundi and some of those countries that are, there's conflict in the country. So, but then when we look at the USA, America is high on trafficking. Extremely high, but then once again, the South America with the cartels and operating their child trafficking. So it is a global problem. The human traffic tip report is a good indication if you want to learn more, because they actually rank the countries at tier 2 or tier 1 or what is the danger. So it's a human traffic tip report that comes out yearly. And that is a good indication to tell yourself, is this country a high-risk country or not? Or what is the government, and also that specific country, what is the government's response? Are they actually fighting it on a within the country?
And what do you think is our government response? Because I would imagine the collaborations also between government, NGOs, and international partners in fighting these syndicates then becomes important.
Yeah, correct. So South Africa, unfortunately, was downgraded to tier, I think it's tier 2, but we have stabilized it a little bit now. But once again, our report for the TIP report has not been sufficient. We had to, our government needs to help give proper feedback on how many cases do we have, what is law enforcement doing. So my advice would be there definitely needs to be an international collaboration and strengthening with our networks, because the mandate still belongs to DPCI to investigate these cases. So we always fight it from a few angles. But the first is the investigating officers to make sure that we empower the human traffic units with resources, because there's not enough resources and not enough trained investigating officers on these cases, to make sure that we target the financial crimes that are surrounding these cases. So there definitely needs to be approach from government side, but then also what is our aftercare processes, and then as a country, the community does play a crucial role in whistleblowing and training the community and South Africans how to identify it and how to stay safe. We all have a responsibility in fighting human trafficking as an entire country.
Yeah. And for those who are lucky enough to be rescued, what kind of support, whether emotional, financial, psychological, like what kind of support do those survivors of trafficking need in order to rebuild their lives? And are there enough avenues for them to get that support?
Yeah, firstly, I would compliment the Department of Social Development. Specifically, we've been working with the Gauteng unit on trafficking, and they've really been making so much effort to support the victims from Myanmar. Obviously the victims don't always request some of the support, but they work closely with us as an NGO in making sure that if there's counselling needs, then we try to fill those needs. As Brave to Love, we actually run an e-hub, which we start. It's an entrepreneurial program that we help these victims start up their own businesses, because if we need to eliminate the vulnerability of the economic place in the economy to actually generate income, so they don't fall victim again. So when it comes to labor trafficking, yes, there's always trauma around it, but with sex trafficking, there's always drug abuse, and the trauma for me is more severe, and the recovery process is longer, because you can just imagine some of these victims that we've been working with have been they were trafficked into the commercial sex trade within brothels as teenagers already. They were raped 10 times a day, forced to use drugs. So the severity of the trauma is really intense, and it's definitely a long-term recovery process. We do have very good safe houses, but these are all privately run by NGOs. The government needs to definitely supply more resources to these recovery programs. Unfortunately, a lot of times even their hands are sometimes, because they don't always have the financial means to support the victims to what they need. And then when we look at repatriation of international victims, where DIRCO needs to be involved in actually supplying the funding to get the victims back. Sometimes also that's a question, because there's not always funding from DIRCO side to say, okay, do we have, but at least the 23 definitely DIRCO that supply the repatriation fee for that, which we're very grateful for. But the NGOs are trying to fill the gap where it's needed. Okay.
Emma, thank you so much, and thanks for the incredible work that you guys do at Brave to Love. I really appreciate you making time to speak to us about this issue. Emma Van Der Walt is the founder of Brave to Love. It's an anti-human trafficking organization. It's 11:31.